Could you take the screen down, James, please? Good morning, Bore da, and welcome to another Three Nations webinar. We're all happy to be with you on this second day of Dementia Action Week, and to match that up, our webinar today is the importance of an early, or why I wanted a diagnosis. We've got a good, varied panel to help us discuss this issue. And we'll take it from there. Dementia, I'd just like to say from this point, dementia is a profoundly life-changing condition. You don't need me to tell you that. And reactions to a diagnosis can range from dismay to deep sadness, to anger sometimes, and despair. But for many people, it can come as a relief. A diagnosis may well provide long-awaited answers for failing memory, communication problems, and changes in behaviour. An early diagnosis, which I believe is vital, opens the door to care and treatment. It helps people plan ahead while they can still make important decisions on their care and support needs, both financial and legal. It also helps them and their families receive practical information, advice and guidelines as they face new challenges. As always, we have a panel to help us, and they'll introduce themselves shortly as we go around. My name is Nigel. I'm chair of the Three Nations Dementia Working Group, and I'll be chairing this session for the next hour or so. If I can just remind you, these webinars actually do rely on you. We need your comments, responses, which you can put in the chat boxes. Our questions, which also you can put in the text boxes. If you put your hand up, unfortunately, we can't see you. But if you put the questions in the text box, we'll get around them during the course of the next hour or so. These webinars are designed, produced, and presented by people living with dementia. We can't deal with individual queries, but we can signpost in many cases where you can go to get help or resolving of your question. Right, well, that's all from me. Now I'm going to the important stuff, the people who are here to discuss why a diagnosis is so important. And our first contribution is Matthew Hobson. He's done a fantastic job in a report for which I was part of, sponsored by the Alzheimer's Society in diagnostic pathways. And I'll just leave it over to you. Morning, Matthew.
Brilliant. Morning. Thanks for having me on, Nigel. Morning, everyone. I had some slight IT issues, so I'm on my phone, which I can only apologise for, but hopefully I can give you a really good overview of the report itself. James, would you mind sharing the slides for me? Brilliant. Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Matthew Hobson. I'm a policy officer at the Alzheimer's Society, and I'm here to talk to you today about our new report, which is titled Improving Access to a Timely and Accurate Diagnosis of Dementia in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, so across all three nations. Next slide, please. So I think there's a really clear reason as to why we did this, in that I think 91% of people have told, we know 91% of people have told us that they see clear benefits from getting a diagnosis, but there are over 300,000 people across all three nations that don't have one. In England, the diagnosis rate is currently 63%, which is below the national ambition of 66.7%. And we know that in Wales, it's around between 50 and 55%. And in Northern Ireland, it's around 60%, which again means that there are hundreds of thousands of people that don't have a diagnosis, which unlocks really important care and support. We as a policy team organised 3 roundtables in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. We invited really senior clinicians, researchers and people living with dementia to kind of discuss the barriers to getting a timely and accurate diagnosis of dementia. And we really wanted to identify those barriers and then come to a consensus on the solutions to how we overcome those barriers. And the report is essentially a summary of all the discussions that we had with those really important stakeholders and most importantly, people living with dementia. And we had 27 signatories to a consensus statement at the end of all of that, which is kind of advocating for practical solutions and kind of tangible change. And the report is mainly aimed at kind of key decision makers in government, health and social care, and local systems at a local level. But we really want kind of ICSs, integrated care systems, NHS trusts, and the clinicians who provide that all important diagnostic care to implement these solutions. And we think this is a really good way to kind of get a real improvement in the kind of dementia pathway and really improve the care that people get by reducing those barriers. Next slide, please. So we focused around 4 kind of key themes. So I'm going to run through them in a small amount of detail, but the first one is obviously workforce and new ways of working. And we kind of identified there are a lot of challenges in the capacity in terms of the staff to be able to deliver a good quality diagnosis, and also in terms of the recruitment and training and development of staff. So it's really important that staff are trained to have the right kind of training to deliver the really important care that they do deliver. And we found that in a lot of times staff simply don't have the training or are unable to deliver a really high quality diagnosis. In terms of the health inequalities and public health messaging, which was the second key theme, one of the big barriers we encountered, what we found from these discussions, was that there's still a really big stigma around dementia. So people may feel that many of the symptoms caused by dementia are simply a part of getting old, but this isn't really the case. 53% of people listed not being certain if it is a dementia or just part of getting old as a reason why they didn't get a diagnosis, and 34% listed not wanting people to think they were losing their mind as a reason for not seeking a diagnosis, which really highlights that there is still a stigma around dementia as a condition. There's also a massive kind of variation in your likelihood or chance of being diagnosed based on rurality, deprivation, ethnicity. And we know that people who live in rural areas face many more barriers to getting a diagnosis than those who live in urban areas, to do with things like transport, access to kind of memory clinics and services and things like that. And just people who live in rural areas or who are potentially more deprived or from ethnic minorities are more likely to face barriers to getting a diagnosis. And finally, on the health inequality side of things, access to assessment is really important. So for people who don't speak English as a first language, there are often barriers placed in their way to getting a diagnosis. So for example, many people who speak Welsh as a first language, it's really important there are culturally appropriate bilingual interpreters available for people who speak Welsh as a first language. And then on the third piece around financial and system pressures, in terms of the system pressures, one of the key things that was highlighted was there's a lack of support during the diagnostic process. So many people tell us that when they are given a diagnosis, they're simply sat down and told, you now have dementia, handed a couple of leaflets and pushed out of the room. But actually that's not good enough. People need to be supported and they need to be signposted to where towards the kind of right resources and the care and support that can be available. And as well, from a kind of more system level, there's a lack of guidance for clinicians on that kind of diagnostic care and post-diagnostic care, which we want to see changed by decision makers like NHS England and the Department of Health. We need to see that changed. And then finally, on the future-proofing of the diagnostic system, there is an inequity of access to and waiting times for brain scans, which are really, really important in getting a subtype diagnosis. So as some of you may know, we're potentially looking at the kind of potential disease modifying treatments coming down the line. So successful recent trials of lecanemab and donanemab, which would only be suitable for people with Alzheimer's, but that is still an incredibly exciting development, which means with drugs potentially coming down the line in a few years' time. But we need to make sure that people can get that subtype diagnosis accurately, because otherwise, if you don't get a subtype diagnosis, you can't get access to the drugs. And also as well, it's really important that people can access the clinical and research trials to kind of be involved when they want to in the trials for these sorts of drugs. Next slide, please. And so the headline consensus statement, so this is the kind of the key recommendations that we came up with. So dementia stakeholders must come together to advocate for better funded and evidence-based dementia pathways. So that's kind of what I was talking about with the whole pathway, and that there really needs to be a better alignment within systems so that people aren't sent all over the place, and people have it's really clear for people with dementia who they can go to for support and what support they can get. Pathways must deliver effective care, support, intervention, and treatments for all of those living with dementia. And finally, people living with dementia highlight the value of an early and accurate diagnosis and preparing for the future, and this should be a fundamental right. Much of this is rooted in the dementia statements from Alzheimer's Society, which are published on our website, which are really led by people living with dementia and the kind of rights that they should have access to. And I think that's really fundamental when we do all of this, is that people with dementia's heart, their voice is at the heart of all of this, because ultimately they're the ones who will know what's best for them. And finally, on the last 2 points, the stakeholders must utilize the advent of new disease-modifying treatments as a driver for immediate system change. So as I mentioned, with potential new disease-modifying treatments coming down the line, there's a really good opportunity to kind of improve the diagnostic pathway and process. And the final one is national health systems must commit to returning diagnosis rates to pre-pandemic levels and building capacity for going beyond this in the future. So as I mentioned at the start, there are 300,000 plus people across all 3 nations who simply aren't getting a diagnosis, and we are not hitting the target in England for the diagnostic rate, and that has to be improved. Final slide, please, James. Brilliant. So as I mentioned, this report is going to be, we have a bunch of parliamentary events this week in Dementia Action Week, which we're really excited about. So we have a parliamentary event in Stormont in Northern Ireland yesterday, and we have an event at Westminster Parliament tomorrow. And we're going to be sharing this report with parliamentarians to try and influence politicians and try and make sure they implement some of the recommendations, because we think that's really, really important that we get politicians on side to bring through that change. It'll also inform our conversations as a policy team with decision makers in NHS England and the Department of Health. So those are the kind of some of the key stakeholders we want to implement the recommendations. And then finally, much of the change actually happens at a local level. So with integrated care and with NHS trusts, that it's really important we can share this with local health and care system leaders to get this implemented at a local level so people can actually see the real change in their local area. Because it's all well and good having the national level recommendations, but it's really key to implement those at a local level. And then this is the final slide. Sorry, James. And then, yeah, if you want to read the full report, you can either scan that QR code or go to that link just there. So if you've got your phone on you, you can scan that QR code and it will take you to the full report and the summary, which is a consensus statement, which is 2 pages long, which will have further information on the recommendations, which I didn't go into in detail on this webinar. But if you would like to read more, or even if you have any questions that I can't answer with you now today, please feel free to email policy@alzheimers.org.uk. That's all from me. And I saw as I was talking, there were some questions in the chat.
Yes, Matthew. First, a question from me. I advise the Welsh government, and I sit on a thing called the DOIG, which feeds directly to the Welsh government. And I also sit in the Prime Minister's Champions Group as well. And diagnostic rates are a constant feature, constant agenda items. Particularly since COVID, we haven't caught up with the distractions, well, not the distractions, but the restrictions during COVID where people couldn't get a diagnosis. And the opinion, I'd just like an opinion on this. I mean, I think it is down to system pressures, this lack of diagnostic, and it is down to a poor representation of where you should go for a diagnosis if the issues come along. So it's both an issue of manpower and getting back to where we were, and of public health education. Do you think that those are viable?
Completely agree, and I think you're totally right to point out, as I mentioned, that a lot of it happens at a local level, and I think that every integrated care system or trust or people who provide these services has totally different capacity and ability to deliver that diagnosis. So for example, in Stoke-on-Trent, the diagnosis rate is 83%, whereas if you go to somewhere in Devon, it's down to 50%. So it really is dependent on the capacity within that local system, and it depends on a multitude of different things. It can be anything from as I mentioned, rurality versus urban split. So we find that people in urban areas tend to be more likely to be diagnosed than in a rural area. It also is to do with attitudes from clinicians. So for example, it depends on whether GPs are willing and kind of really push that diagnosis, or say, oh no, it's just part of getting old, which I know is a rare response, but it really depends on the attitude of clinicians. And I think also as well, it depends on how much of a priority that the system makes dementia. So some systems in some local areas are brilliant at really pushing for that early diagnosis, sending people to memory clinics to get a diagnosis, sending people to radiography to get a brain scan. But some systems just don't place as much of a priority on that, which from our perspective has been one of the real challenges when we try and ensure that care is as equitable as possible and people aren't really faced by kind of postcode lottery, which is your access to a diagnosis is determined simply by where you live, which is just unacceptable.
Yes. I mean, we find that nationally. Also, Peter Clark has asked a question about has there been a cost comparison done between a nuclear PET scan and the memory clinic circus. Yeah.
That's a really good question. So not to my knowledge, but on the PET scans as well, that if anything, it highlights my points that we know that there are some integrated care system geographies that simply don't have a PET scanner at all. So people couldn't even get a PET scan without having to travel 1 to 2 hours to a place where a PET scanner is available. I'm not sure on the costing, but that's a really good question. I can go away and take that away. But I think one of the points we'd be really keen to stress is that actually there's very inequitable access to brain scans, and that people, again, that postcode lottery aspect that I was talking about means that simply because of where you live, you simply can't get a PET scan, or you have to travel 1, 2, 3 hours to travel to a hospital to get one.
Yes, yeah. I don't want everybody's eyes to roll in the back of their head, but I do think a timely diagnosis is a human right, as opposed to a clinical decision. You know,
absolutely.
If you go into hospital with and you have pains in the back or pains in the neck, you don't have to wait 6 months till somebody tells you, well, you might have rheumatoid arthritis or something. Well, thank you, Matthew. I do recommend that everybody actually reads the report, because it's not the usual standard of report. In other words, it's not the usual sort of full of statistics and nothing else. It's a real live document.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Matthew would love your comments on it, and I'm sure the society would as well. Thank you so much, and thank you for the work you've done with that to highlight some of the deficiencies within the existing services and recommendations of the future ones. Thank you very much, Matthew.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, well, our next contributor is Mac from Stoke-on-Trent, but apparently everything's ticking you blue up there, Mac. You got no problems at all.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad at least we're on the map for something. Thank you, Matthew. Nice to be here once again. And of course, all these things that Matthew's highlighted, again, are things that we need to know. And people with diagnoses, what happens is that because we all understand that it's a progressive condition, it changes many to many, day to day. Therefore, we need to understand the type of dementia we have and the type of issues we're going to face with. That's one of the reasons why early diagnosis is important. At the same time, I feel through my experience that there are things that people around you notice and you yourself are unaware of. So therefore, sometimes they point out those things, and sometimes they try to hide it in case they offend the person. And that's another issue that one has to face. I personally believe that, like my diagnosis was sort of different. It was accidental. I had no symptoms. And my diagnosis, if you like, or my dementia started after my diagnosis, because that's when it really hit me that I have got something that, as of today is not curable. It's a disease that's only got one end result, and it was frightening. And for some people, it might be a relief, like Nigel said earlier on, it might be a relief for them to know that that is the reason why they're having these problems. But if somebody is not having any problems, it's difficult to accept. But I was mature enough and, educated enough to accept the fact that I have got a condition and it's here to stay. And there are things that I have to do to overcome that. And I don't want the disease to take over. So I did the research. At the same time, there wasn't a lot of help available at the time. I was diagnosed back in 2010, and I just didn't know where to go. So I think that's important, because once you're diagnosed, at least you've got that time to plan ahead. And not only that, to actually study and make the necessary arrangements and join the necessary organizations to help you to overcome this, or even live comfortably with it. The thing that I found most helpful was peer sport, being amongst people with the same condition, because they are either experiencing it or they've experienced it, and sharing the tips, and that helped. But again, it's once you know that you've been diagnosed with something, because the word dementia itself is frightening, because people automatically assume the worst possible scenario. So therefore, dementia doesn't do it justice, because it's a term, it's not a disease on its own, but people out there, normal people, don't understand that. And when you mention dementia, they automatically assume that you're at a latter stage and you're incapable or incompetent. But we've shown, all three of us here today, that we've lived for so long, and we are living well with it. We do have our problems. We do sometimes fight it. We sometimes live with it. We sometimes struggle with it. We sometimes suffer with it. But at the end of the day, I think that we can have a good, comfortable quality of life with the right support and right people around us. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mark. One of the things that I keep on hearing, and I'd like your view on this, is if you know one person with dementia, you know one person with dementia. Because I feel that the broader way of richer diagnostic decisions sort of lumps us all into one category. How important is it to know the different types of dementia and how they affect you?
I think, knowing that person makes a difference. The type of industry that person has been in, the type of education he's had, his ethnic background even, and of course, the type of environment that person has lived in. So, when they say if you met one person with dementia, you met one person with dementia, but you can have that one person at 3 different times of the day and having 3 different people that you're talking to because of the sheer condition that he or she is in. So I think all these things are important. Knowing the person should be the heart of things. They all say it's person-centered and that, but it isn't practice in reality.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was diagnosed, it absolutely devastated me because people constantly, there's a question there from Emma Mosselin. Lots of our clients talk about peer support and being in a group with others experiencing the same thing. Do you think peer support is, as soon as you can do it, is something which everybody should seek out?
I personally think so, because it's been the backbone to my recovery, simply because when you're first hit with the diagnosis, the first thing that goes is your confidence. And the only thing that confidence can bring back up is people who are actually experiencing the same condition, and just talking to them, being amongst them, and sharing the tips makes you comfortable, because that trust factor comes in straight away, because you start trusting these people, because these are the people that are actually living with it just as you are.
Yeah, I kind of argue constantly with clinicians, mappers, people who do, who get the figures in, is that Wales allegedly has 45,000 people. I say allegedly because we've only got a 50% diagnostic rate. As 45,000 people with a diagnosis, but in actual fact, when you deep dive the impact of that diagnosis, if each person has, say, 5 to 10 people in their circle, either support circle or family, you could be talking to a population of 500,000. And if you transport that into the UK, into the English numbers, which are 75,000, then that's 0.7 million people. So, when you're planning these services, maybe you should plan them to scale. I've got another question here. Is there a date from Chris O'Brien? Is there a date when we can ask a GP about the 2 new Alzheimer's, the new drugs? I mean, they've not done clinical trials in England yet, so no, there isn't a date. And the efficacy of them of one of them is still in question. So they'll have to pass the European test first and then the British test, I think. Am I right in saying that, Matthew?
Yeah, I was just going to come in and say, yeah, so they need to be approved by the regulatory body in England called the NIHR. And as you say, they'd have to pass European tests first. They have been approved, I believe, and I can go and check this in America, but obviously they need to be passed in Europe and in England and in the UK first. So there isn't a date as of yet, but the reason why we're excited about it, and admittedly, we have to temper that excitement with kind of we have to temper it a little bit, but this is the first time in kind of 30 years that we've seen a drug that kind of can potentially slow down the effect of Alzheimer's disease. So, but I agree, there is still a ways to go with kind of before implementation, and GPs and clinicians have access to that on the diagnostic pathway.
Yeah. I mean, it's good news, but it's good news tempered with caution, because we've been led down these roads so many times, and which brings me on nicely to my next our next participant is Hilary, because I read a famous speech of hers that she made to the World Dementia Council about why a cure for Alzheimer's was slow coming. Well, I think the problem is the complexity, which she highlighted, but also the fact that the researchers needed to work harder again, which I think we all agree is right. Well, good morning, Hilary.
Morning, Nigel. Morning, everybody. Right, so why I wanted a diagnosis. Well, I think that's the wrong title, because I didn't want a diagnosis. I wanted to know I just wanted to know whether I had it or not. Nobody really wants the diagnosis at the end of the day. So this for me started back in the year 2000. I've always been a control freak, and I didn't appreciate the gift of a brain I've been given. I was a member of Mensa. I never needed to take notes because my memory was so good, and my cognitive function was pretty good as well. I'd say this goes back to the year 2000, because that's the first time I'm aware of two things that happened which were untypical for me. One was we successfully floated our company on the London Stock Exchange. And sorry, I'm doing a lot of M's. And I was on the way to London to do the presentations to the city, and I got on the tube and went the wrong way. I've never done that before in my life. And another thing that year, I completely missed a board meeting. I just never had to use a diary. My diary was in my brain. So that's the first time I became aware. It didn't bother me. It was just something that happened. So it didn't concern me. That year, I decided to take some time off, because off work, to travel. And 2 years after that, I wanted to start working again. So I got a part-time job. In 2006, I started to notice some things, small things on their own that wouldn't bother anybody. All the typical things people say about somebody with dementia. On their own, they don't bother you, but add them together and they started to concern me. In 2007, my now husband Peter asked me to marry him. Now, I didn't want him marrying dementia. So I went back to my GP and just told him what was happening, the concerns I had. He said, "You've got nothing to worry about," because I scored 100% on all the tests, the cognitive tests and the memory tests. I just scored 100%. So he said, "It's normal aging, or it's the menopause. Go away, get married, get on with your life." So we did that. We got married. In 2010, things were getting worse for me. I could hide the problems very, very easily, but I was becoming more conscious that my brain wasn't working like it used to work. So I went back to the GP. This time it was put down to stress. In 2012, some other things happened which really concerned me. Again, I could hide it to the people around me, but I knew something wasn't right. So I went back, and this time I saw a registrar. My GP was off. I saw a registrar, and I think he referred me for an MRI scan. Because again, I still scoring really highly on all the tests that they do. But something prompted him to refer me for an MRI. I had the MRI scan and it showed brain shrinkage, typical of Alzheimer's. And that's when I got the diagnosis of Alzheimer's. So I was still working and I wanted to carry on working. So I was told the trustees and the senior management, and I have to say they were amazing. That employer was absolutely amazing, because my boss said, right, you do what you can, you carry on doing what you can, and I'll take care of the rest. And he did that for another 6 years. In 2013, we told all the staff about my diagnosis. We didn't tell them immediately because we didn't think there was a need to, because I was still functioning pretty okay. But in 2013, well, I was going to appear on the One Show, so we thought it only right to tell the staff rather than they sort of hear it through the back door, as it were. So we told the staff, and they were, on the whole, were brilliant and really supportive of me. So I carried on working, but as time goes on, unfortunately, there's some people who will take advantage of a situation, and the people that take advantage of your what am I trying to say? Troublemakers at work would use it against me. They would say I'd said something which I know I just wouldn't have said, but I could no longer look people in the eye and say, I never said that, or I did tell you to do that. So I just didn't trust my brain enough to be able to tell them I had said that, or I hadn't said something. So in 2017, I decided to stop work, to leave work. But I'm convinced that carrying on working for as long as I did really helped slow my decline. The other thing was, during that period, I got heavily involved in research as a participant, as well as on steering groups and things. And I realized then the importance of getting an accurate diagnosis, because as a result of one of the studies I was involved in, I had a PET scan. It showed that I didn't have amyloid in my brain, so I did not have Alzheimer's. And today, I still don't know what type of dementia I've actually got. The consultants, the neurologists I see say, yes, I have got a dementia, possibly Lewy bodies, but I'm not hallucinating yet. Hopefully I won't. So we don't know if it's Lewy bodies or not. And I've now been diagnosed with atypical Parkinson's as well. But that's up for debate. So I still, after 20 years, I still have not got a definitive diagnosis of the type of dementia I have got. For a while I was being challenged that I didn't have dementia, but that's now not up for debate. Well, I suppose it's always up for debate. But how I'm speaking now is so different to how I wouldn't have struggled with this two or 3 years ago. And I find it quite difficult speaking now. I'm having to read notes, and I've used to have to do that. So for me, the benefits of getting a diagnosis is it gives you back control of your life. I really like to be in control. And when you know what you're having to deal with, it gives you the ability to do that. Peter always says we'd have got married anyway, even if I had got the diagnosis. At the time when he asked me, I say we wouldn't, but we'll never go know the answer to that one. So I guess the key thing is for me is getting the control. To see somebody said Peter sounds wonderful. He is absolutely wonderful. He is a darling, and I am so lucky I have him. If everybody had a Peter, they'd be in a really good place. Yeah, control and taking part in research is really important for me. I actually got a lot more information and better care and treatment at being part of research, because I got access to a lot of tests you can't get on the NHS, and scans. I've probably had 6 or 7 scans as a result of participating. So I got a lot more information as a result of participating in research than I would if I hadn't. And I am convinced it has slowed my decline. So Nigel, I think that's pretty much what I was going to say. And sorry for all the humming and ahhing.
Hilary, it's a pleasure, always a pleasure to hear from you. We've known each other now for how long? Too long to mention, really. And Hilary is very good at hiding a light under a bushel, because if it hadn't been for Hilary, there would be no Three Nations Dementia Working Group. She was the driving force, her and Chris Roberts, to getting it on the map. So we're here because of Hilary. We speak quite a bit, I don't see the changes, and that's the general problem, I think, with dementia. Unless you actually, specifically going to look for the changes, they're not usually that obvious. Can I just ask you one question? You mentioned that research helped you. How vital do you think it is that we all, if given the opportunity, involve ourselves in research?
Sorry, Nigel, I didn't hear catch.
How important is it that people with a diagnosis involve themselves in research?
I think it's very important if they feel able to, and research doesn't have to be invasive. There's a lot of research going on that people can get involved in, and you don't have to have needles stuck in you or drugs or anything like that. But if people don't do it, we're not going to get answers.
Yeah.
So somebody has to be the guinea pigs.
Yeah, I tend to totally agree with you there, that the more of us that go and take our issues to researchers to understand a lot better, the quicker, better outcomes will happen for people living with dementia. Research is vital, but it's not everything.
I must say, I am concerned that potentially some good something that works will have been missed because of the misdiagnoses over the years. Back in 2012, five or more years ago, people weren't being diagnosed with the right type of dementia. So all these trials that were failing could have been failing because they weren't targeting the right patients. people like myself, I was taking part in Alzheimer's trials and I haven't got Alzheimer's. And that concerns me because it's quite high, I think, isn't it? 30% misdiagnosis of the subtype of dementia. So there could be things that worked, but would have worked, but got missed.
And I mean, the timing of a diagnosis is so important as well. It's very important, I think, that people get an accurate early diagnosis so the services can get to you. Mark, I mean, do you think the diagnostic services are culturally competent?
I think what one has to look at it is that, you know, dementia doesn't see color, dementia doesn't see language, dementia doesn't see anything, and it affects everybody. And just looking at it and saying, is it inclusive or not, is unfair. What we need to look at it is that they don't use the jargon, they use average, everyday terms and make it understood to the person, and not always assume that that person is incapable of understanding. And I think as far as culture, you mentioned, Nigel, what matters is that, you know, person with dementia communicates in so many different ways. And it's knowing that person and knowing his behavior, that is the important bit. Gestures are important, eye contact, you know, and body language, all that is important. And one has to know that in some cultures, this means yes, but in some cultures, this means yes. So there are times when nodding the head is important and understanding what that person is trying to say. So to make it sort of accommodating, I think a basic knowledge of the languages and culture is important. And then custom and faith also plays a big part in it. And they're all issues that a person with dementia faces. And I think basic education in all these areas is important to actually be able to treat or even communicate with that person so that he or she is able to get the treatment that she or he needs.
Yeah. As you know, I come from a Romany background, and the most difficult thing for that is you have to explain what dementia is, because in Romany, there's no word for dementia. You know, it's not seen as a big issue. Whether that's right or whether that's wrong is a place for another argument, but there is a difficulty. There's a couple of quite interesting, one question from Peter Clark. Given how quickly the COVID vaccines were approved from scratch, why do we accept that it's going to take until 2025 before approval of Doranabam, which has completed stage 3 trials? That's you know, I mean, they rushed the COVID thing through. I suppose it's because maybe you know, is dementia that high a priority? Matthew?
So I think, yeah, one of the really big things that we are kind of, in terms of, from an influencing side of things, so with decision makers, with the government, with the NHS, is really making dementia a priority. That's one of our kind of taglines at the moment, that we're really trying to push it up the agenda and say, look, this is a really it is an incredibly, you know, this affects hundreds of thousands of people, and why is, you know, basically asking the same question you're saying, Peter, which is, why is this not much of a priority? You know, what are you doing to make it a priority? And how, you know, I think the piece around, I couldn't comment on the specifics of the vaccine and the kind of the comparison between that and the new drugs coming through, but absolutely in terms of make dementia as a priority with decision makers and saying, well, it's already passed its stage 3 trials, what are the barriers for it being implemented in the UK? Pushing that definitely is something that, like, we as an influencing team in terms of government are definitely kind of trying to ask those sort of questions. Yeah.
I mean, it does highlight because I mean, for big pharma, you know, the sooner they get something like this approved, the better, because it's going to be a huge windfall for them, because everybody's going to, you know, it's one of the biggest killers in the UK at the moment, and everybody's got this fear of it, and the people want answers once the particular condition hits them.
I think as well, I'd just come in quickly to say as well that obviously I don't have a clinical background, unfortunately, but I would also be keen to temper the discussion with the new drugs. Obviously, there are reports of kind of the side effects, and so I think it's always important to consider that as well. In that from a clinical perspective, those are things that will all be taken into account. And I think the National Institute for Health and Care Research, which are the ones who approve these drugs, you have to go through a very stringent process and ensure that the side effects aren't such that we'd have to consider not implementing them. So I think that's probably something I couldn't comment as such, not being from a clinical background myself, but it's always important to temper it with the kind of the potential side effects and those kind of things.
Yeah. I mean, that is important. You don't want to make the condition worse, and B, you don't want people saying, well, I spent all this money, or we spent all this money, and it has moved the needle one bit. And I think that's the key. We want to move the needle one bit. My diagnosis took 5 years to get to me. That's unacceptable. It was unacceptable then, and it's unacceptable now. People have a right to know. If they have the condition, people have the right to know. So why do people not want a diagnosis? I mean, is it just stigma? Do you remember? You're probably too young, Matthew, so I'll ask my other members of my insult them and ask them. But do you remember when we used to go to the shopping centres and the British Heart Foundation says, "Come and have your blood pressure taken here," and they take your blood pressure for nothing and tell you that your blood pressure was high, or they refer you, or they advise you. Why don't we have the same sort of things for brain health? And why don't we have this? Why is the public health system, well, we all know without getting political about it, but why is the public health system so slow in getting to grips with these issues of dementia? Because it is all a matter of education, isn't it? And understanding the condition and doing away with the stigma.
Absolutely. I mean, I think on the stigma, unless Masood, did you want to come in?
Sorry?
No, I think Masood wanted to come in.
What I wanted to say was that, I come from a South Asian background. And as far as that community is concerned, it's a taboo subject. People don't talk about it. So we've already established here through the figures that you gave earlier on, Matthew, that there are so many people out there that are not yet diagnosed. So that means that there are people out there who have got the diagnosis, but they don't know yet. And the same applies to this community. Here, it's slightly different. There are people who have been diagnosed, but they don't fully understand it, simply because there's no word for dementia. And also, the literature that's provided, people don't read it. Let's be honest. Even the normal people that can read English people, it all goes in the bin because it's overwhelming and it's too much. You're already upset about the condition that you have. You're in anger. You're in denial, and in that position, who is going to read all the leaflets that you provided? So one-to-one support is more important than anything.
Yes.
And this is where I think, afterwards, keeping in touch with the person with dementia and then follow-up appointments and educate him or her on the type of dementia, type of the disease that they have, so that the issues that disease brings can be tackled.
Yeah, I mean, also something which is, not acknowledged is the age of the person when they get the diagnosis, because if you're of working age, then it's a whole set of different issues than if you're in your 60s, 70s, or 80s. Well, 60 is still working age, I know. And one of the things that always sort of bothered when I first got my diagnosis, I was given this helplessness certificate, almost like prescribed disability, really. You won't be able to do this, you won't be able to do that, and do this and do that, or go here and go there. And I wasn't given any sort of validation that my life would be untouched for a while. And also the services took about a year to get to me. And I think I unconsciously decided to eat and drink myself to death. I mean, because for a year I was on my own, and my weight went up to 33 stone. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I'd have to go on a diet again, the roly-polies now. But I mean, it was severely too much. And then 3 very annoying people came to my door, occupational therapists, and they went through my life like a religious fervor. You know, they made me lose weight, they made me get active, they introduced me to peer support groups and this kind of stuff. And a little bit of my own life I stole back off dementia because I got a little bit better, simply because it was suddenly clear to me that the decline wasn't going to be as rapid as I thought it would be. And it's back to that, you know, without sugar in the pill, but saying, well, you know, there's a quality of life you can have after diagnosis. And I think sometimes these messages are missed or not given because the people who are giving them are overwhelmed by other issues anyway. The memory assessment units probably haven't got the time to run information courses. So what we've done is we've taken it upon ourselves to do that in Wales, in particular. I'm just going to finish on a final point on that because it's we've got some time to go. To you, Hilary, what would have been the benefit of an early diagnosis? Can I ask you that question?
You can ask me the question, yes.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, there's other problems with getting the diagnosis, an early diagnosis. Well, the benefits are you can take control. I am convinced you can slowly decline by, well, use it or lose it. So if you get a diagnosis, you can take active steps to push yourself, push your brain, and keep it working for longer. But I was just thinking about, I was lucky because I got a very good employer who actually wanted to help me carry on working. There's not that many employers that will do that, be proactive in trying to help somebody stay on at work. But there's other implications of it as well, getting a diagnosis. For example, insurance costs. Travel insurance costs the earth for me now. What else? There are other things where people, perhaps driving. I've been lucky. I've diagnosed 10 years ago, and this is the first year I've got to have a driving assessment. But people worry about if their license is going to be taken off them. And so that probably stops some people from seeking a diagnosis. But I would want to know, because I don't want to be a danger to other people. I don't want to be a danger to myself or other people. So get the diagnosis as soon as you can and take back control.
Yes. Yeah, that's the key, isn't it? You know, the sooner you know, the better, because you can do something about it.
Yeah.
Or you can seek out help. That is the best. Mark, have you got any thoughts on an early diagnosis?
Yeah, I mean, it helps you so that you can prepare, but also I think it gives you the opportunity to do a little bit of research on the matter itself, because, you know, there isn't a lot available out there, and most people don't even understand that there are so many different types. They believe that dementia itself is the disease, which it isn't on its own. It's a term used to describe the disease. And also it helps you to understand some of the changes that you actually go through. Because if you don't understand what type of dementia you have, you can't really link the changes that are happening, and people around you won't be able to pinpoint it. So it is important. And I think it's also, I mean, had I known what I know about dementia today, had I known that at the diagnosis, I wouldn't have stopped work. I stopped work because I did not know about the condition, and I assumed the worst. And also, there was nothing out there to educate me, to tell me.
Yes,
So it is important to know.
yes. This myth, can we carry on working? Is
Nigel,
yeah,
I've had a ball since I got diagnosed. I mean, I've had 10 really good years. The opportunities I've had, that dementia has given me, the people I've met, the friends I've made, it's just been phenomenal.
yes. I think you're right. There is life after the diagnosis, but I think it's the way the diagnosis sometimes delivered to us, which disempowers us. So that certainly disempowers me. Matthew, I mean, an early accurate diagnosis is a key really to a life of quality, isn't it?
Absolutely.
After diagnosis.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that you guys have all highlighted really well, and things that I hear all the time, is that ultimately it's all about the support you can get. And it's all about how the diagnosis is delivered to you by the person who diagnoses you. Do they give you the support and the resources that you need to live well with dementia? And it's not a case of, as you say, you get dementia and kind of, oh, that's it. You can absolutely live well with dementia. And I think that's kind of what it's no kind of, it's no mistake that the first thing on our report is workforce and ways of working. That's the first point that we focused on, because we need to have the staff who are trained and have the time to deliver that support, and the people and deliver it in a compassionate way that kind of really conveys all of the information that someone needs when they get that diagnosis. And I think as well, I mean, again, the title of the report is Improving Access to a Timely and Accurate Diagnosis of Dementia, because it's not just getting a diagnosis, it's ensuring that it's early, and it's that you know, you can plan. I think Masood's point was brilliant about how once you have that information, you can make informed decisions and you can plan. And so that's why we kind of focus on the timely point. And again, Hillary's point about the accuracy is that, you know, it's shocking to hear that you kind of had multiple different diagnoses of different types of dementia, and that accuracy is so important because it enables you to plan, and it enables you to kind of get the support that is specific to the type of dementia that you have. So I think those are, you have both highlighted brilliantly that those are such key things, the timeliness and the accuracy of that diagnosis. And I think that's why, again, that's why we titled the report the way we have.
Fantastic. We've got 2 minutes left. This is due to my brilliant chairing and the fact that you people have contributed brilliant. I got to thank you for that. Thank you, Mac. Thank you, Hillary, and thank you, Matthew, for spending your time. And thank you to the audience as well. For we're always pleased when people turn up and have a listen to what we've got to say. Have a great Dementia Action Week to the participants and to all of us. I wish you the next webinar is. We're going to hand over to Deep, and it's on the 30th of May, same time, 11 till 2. James has put the link into how you can register. And can I wish you all a good day? And if the audience can log out, we guys have to stay behind to talk to things. Bye bye all.